Hello, and welcome to Partners Beyond Parenthood, the podcast that helps new parents thrive without losing themselves. My name is Saba Bazuner, and today I'm joined by Rachael Shepard-Ohta. I hope I said that right. Really happy to have you here today. I've been following you, and I've listened to your podcast, No One Told Us, which is honestly great. I'm really excited to talk to you about different versions of baby-led sleep, so not sleep training. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself briefly, as that may not be a term that many parents are familiar with.
Yeah. So I am Rachael, and I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby. And like you said, I also host a podcast called No One Told Us, where I do kind of similar to what you're doing here, just kind of helping parents learn about things that nobody really prepared us for before, starting our journey in parenthood. So my focus on my Instagram page is on sleep, though. So that's kind of how I first got started in the parenting space, is with sleep. And like you mentioned, more of a baby-led approach, or a biologically normal approach, or an attachment focus. It's called all different things, really. But basically just like not that traditional old school sleep training, and more of a focus on child development and not necessarily co-sleeping, but not necessarily crying it out, kind of finding that middle ground where parents can just feel comfortable and get the rest that they need.
Which is amazing. I wish I had known about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The first question I have for you, what is sleep training from your point of view? Because I feel like there's so many different versions that you hear when you ask someone like, oh, is your baby sleep trained? But they have so many different approaches. What would you define it as?
Yeah. And this is something that's really unfortunate because there is so much misunderstanding. And there are a lot of people that try to twist what it means to kind of suit their own point of view. So there are those people that will say, no, sleep training just means like healthy sleep habits and good sleep hygiene and routines and stuff like that. That to me is not sleep training. Sleep training, if you look at, literature and studies that have been done about it and stuff like that, most of what we're referring to when we say sleep training is those behavior modification techniques. So things like the Ferber method or timed checks or controlled crying, cry it out, extinction. There are a few different techniques. They have a few different names, but really it comes down to trying to extinguish a behavior, which is, the infant crying out at night. And that's done usually through some type of planned ignoring, whether it's a couple of minutes or hours. So that to me is what I am thinking of when I use the term sleep training, is those behavior modification techniques. I'm not talking about putting your baby on a nice routine and using wake windows or using a schedule, or, rocking them to sleep and then putting them down. But I understand it does get really confusing and it gets really muddy. And yeah, there are lots of opinions on it.
Yeah. And I guess like what you say also, every baby's different, right? So like different methods might work for different babies, or you might just be lucky. And like you've said before, you might have that unicorn baby, which if you do, again, so lucky for you, very envious. And you have 3 kids. I know with the first one, you did go ahead with a sleep training method. Again, the resources that you have available to you back then is very different to the access to resources that we have now.
Yeah.
Did you do different versions of sleep training for them all? And how did that develop? Why did you choose to do different versions? Or if you did?
Yeah. So my oldest is about 7. So like you mentioned, it was a completely different landscape back then. There were not all of these Instagram pages and blogs and, different opinions. I was really just hearing one opinion, which is that I had to sleep train him or I would never sleep again. And it was, people in my mommy group, people in my family, my pediatrician, everybody kind of said like, this is what you have to do. It didn't feel like an option. It felt like something that we had to do at some point. So like may as well do it sooner than later. So yeah, we did do a really popular sleep training program here in the States. It's got like millions of followers on Instagram, and I'm sure she's made millions of dollars on this like PDF and video class, which is essentially the Ferber method. So you get, some basics about newborns and babies, about, their sleepy cues and wake windows and things like that. And a lot of it feels very benign. And then you kind of are moved into more harsh methods where it's leaving the baby at increments. If they cry, you ignore for, however many minutes. You can go in and reassure them, but you don't touch them. You don't pick them up. You don't look at them in the eye, like all of kind of stuff. And it makes me like kind of sick to think about doing that now. And, listen, I know it works, quote unquote, works for lots of people. But one thing that's very frustrating to me about this industry is that it does not and will not work for lots of other people. And we were those people where we just had a baby who had a very sensitive temperament, and it didn't work. So we tried it at about 4 months, didn't work. We gave up. Tried it again at like 6 months. Again, didn't work. We gave up. We tried it again at 9 months, and it did not work. So at that point, we were kind of just resigned to, okay, we can't keep doing this. This is like so ridiculous. And so we stopped, and then he just started sleeping through the night on his own like 3 months later, right before he turned 1. And he was a great sleeper ever since. Like to this day, he's, like I said, he's almost 7 and he sleeps 12 hours a night. Like it doesn't ever give us a problem. He loves sleep. My second is, almost 5, and we did things almost like polar opposite with her. So she was actually a really good sleeper as a newborn. So I kind of thought, oh, we're going to be lucky this time. We're not going to have to do any sleep training. We had her in a snoo, but which, I have a whole opinion on those now, but this was again 5 years ago when I didn't know any better. She actually really didn't like being swaddled though. So we didn't like clip her in. We didn't use the snoo swaddles. We didn't have all the crazy motion and vibrating and like loud white noise that it has. So it was essentially just a really expensive bassinet. But anyway, she did pretty well in there until 4 months, when lots of babies go through what's called the 4-month sleep regression. And at that point, we were also moving. It was the very beginning of COVID. It was like April of 2020 at this point, and our lives were just completely chaotic. And that was also when I had started this first sleep certification that I initially did. So I was learning about alternative methods to sleep training, and one of those things is co-sleeping or bed sharing. So I learned all about how to safely bed share. I learned about, how other cultures do it and things like that. So I started bed sharing with her. And we did that for a really long time. It worked really well to get everybody as much sleep as possible. And then we started like just practicing the crib. So this is one thing that I really want parents to know is like, you don't have to bed share forever or contact nap forever if you don't want to. And you also don't have to leave your baby to cry it out. So I was able to start getting her to nap in her crib and go to bed in her crib every night without any sleep training, no cry it out, nothing. Just using like sleep associations and practice and routine and all of those things. So then she was kind of going to bed on her own. And whenever she would wake up like at midnight or 1 a.m. or something, we would let her come into our bed. And that worked really well for us for a long time, doing kind of like a hybrid situation where, she had her independent sleep space, but then we would also bed share when it was, convenient for us. And then we wanted to try for a third. So we decided to start night weaning and getting her to sleep in her own room a little bit more of the time. So she was almost 2. And when we night weaned, she ended up just starting to sleep through the night. So that was that. And then, and now her and her brother share a room, and they do great. They love sleep. They go to bed super easily. They sleep through the night. And then my youngest is almost 2, and she's still kind of co-sleeping with us most of the time, contact napping. It's like when it's your third baby and it's your last, it's so hard to give up those snuggles. And like, I don't know, we just love it this time. So like, we really haven't even tried that hard to get her in a crib or in her own room because we're just kind of soaking it in and enjoying it. But we are going through night weaning with her right now, which is cutting down the night baking a lot. So that's been really good. Sorry, that was a very long answer because it's been so different for each kid. But, that just kind of goes to show that like, you don't have to do things a certain way.
No,
for
absolutely.
every kid. Every kid's different.
Yeah, 100%. When I speak to other friends, I'm like, wow, that really didn't work. Or like, I see that they try certain things and I'm like, that worked for me. It doesn't work for them. Like 100%.
Right.
And I mean, these kids come from the same parents, like you'd think same genes, similar environment, etc. But no, obviously so much can change. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I love the fact that you mentioned that, like, that you kind of like wanted, I guess, a bit more intimacy also for yourself. Like with the second one, I mean, it is a big thing, right? Like you lose a lot of intimacy when you have a kid. Like a lot of the, the physical touch, etc., goes towards the kids just because it's needed. One thing that I think I've definitely been very scared to even think of bed sharing. So we did co-sleeping for 6 months, which worked great. maybe even a bit longer. And like we traveled quite a bit. So she would share the room with us and like I guess be right next to us a lot. But bed sharing, that sounds very scary. Like, and I actually don't find that there is that much information out there. So how did you find the right person to train you on that, or to find, like this is a safe method? How do you go about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot different now. Now there are Instagram pages that are completely dedicated to teaching people how to safely co-sleep. A couple that are great are Co-Sleepy and Happy Co-Sleeper. And they really have just so many resources to help families figure out how to do it, the logistics of it, and to just kind of like help them feel normal. I think, it does have kind of a scary connotation for lots of different reasons. One, parents are worried that it's dangerous. And two, they're worried that it's going to be forever. And three, I think it does kind of cause relationship issues within the parents sometimes if they're not both on board with that type of sleeping arrangement. So like I said, with the first sleep certification that I ever did, they did teach about safely bed sharing. So we talked to Professor James McKenna, who wrote a book called Safe Infant Sleep. And he's actually one of the only researchers, I believe in the world, but in the US, that studies mothers and babies in a lab while they're sleeping and looks at those behaviors of how do they move? Like how lightly does mom sleep when there's a baby next to her and things like that. So highly recommend his book called Safe Infant Sleep. I also looked at a lot of other research and talked to a lot of people throughout the world and in other cultures and other countries. This is something that is just so normal. They would never even dream of putting their babies in another room. So a lot of it was also just changing my perspective and being like, okay, well, I live in the US. I was born, in this culture. I was born with these set of societal norms and people around me were doing this. But that's not all there is in the world, right? Like I can't be that self-centered to think that the US is the only place that does things right or well. Other cultures have definitely done things way better than we have in lots of areas. So kind of looking at that and thinking about like the history of, okay, well, humans have co-slept for thousands of years. And, the safety piece is also something that's really, really important though. And I think a lot of the reasons that we hear, those really tragic stories is because in the US, there are different risk factors that might not be present in other places. So, drinking and smoking, that's a huge risk factor if you're going to co-sleep. And that's something that's, pretty largely done in our society. Soft bedding. So, in places like Japan, where it's very normal to co-sleep, they're not sleeping on these high beds with lots of soft bedding. They're on like a futon or like a more thin, firm mat, very close to the floor or on the floor without tons of big fluffy blankets and pillows. So it's just kind of learning about things like that. And I know it can feel really overwhelming. So one resource that is really great and really simple is called the Safe Sleep 7. So if you just Google Safe Sleep 7, there's kind of these 7 rules or main guidelines that you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about bed sharing with your baby. And even if you don't feel like you want a bed share or you're like, I'm not an attachment parent, I'm not a bed sharing parent, I'm never going to do that, that's totally fine. But what we do know from research is that most parents will bed share at some point, even if they never plan to. And it's actually safer to set up your bed and to safely co-sleep or bed share with your baby than it is to fall asleep with them in the rocking chair or fall asleep with them on the couch. Those situations for sleep are so much more dangerous. And there are so many more deaths that occur on a couch or on a chair than in an adult bed. So just educating yourself is super important, even if you don't think it'll ever happen, because we know that it does.
I love that you went out and thought about different cultures and how that's actually been happening over time. That's incredible. And I think really powerful to add towards the whole conversation of, like how can you help your baby sleep and also yourself?
Totally. Yeah.
I'm very curious for the actual bed sharing, what I've heard, and here, correct me if I'm wrong, does it actually help the cycles? Because I know they go through different cycles and somehow they adapt to yours. How does that work?
Yeah, it's really cool and it's really interesting. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like these babies were inside of us for 9 months and then they're born and it's completely foreign to them. I like to say that the mother's body really is the habitat for the infant. Like when you place a baby on their mother, especially if it's skin to skin, You see that their breathing becomes regulated. You see that their heart rate stabilizes. You see that their breathing is regulated. Like all of these really important systems are regulated when they are being held or when they are being kept close. So there's a very, very clear reason why it feels so good for us to hold our babies because we're supposed to.
Mhm.
And so that piece also occurs during sleep. And we know that both infants and mothers sleep more lightly. They spend more time in lighter stages of sleep when they are in close proximity, which might not sound great because you're like, no, but I want lots of deep sleep. And I hear that, but it actually is thought to be a protective mechanism against SIDS. So we want babies
Mhm.
to be easily roused. We don't want them to fall asleep too deeply and not be able to rouse themselves or wake themselves up if something is wrong. So that piece is really important. And if you're breastfeeding too, you want those frequent wakes and that frequent breastfeeding to keep up your supply. So
Mhm.
yeah, it is exhausting, but there's a very distinct reason for all of that. It's like just how nature has designed it so perfectly.
Yeah, nature is fascinating, and that
Hmm.
piece of information is as well. Thanks for
Yeah, yeah,
sharing.
yeah.
Um, I think if I'm right, you were in general already in the education space for
Hmm.
kids, correct?
Yes.
How
Yeah.
did you choose to learn more about sleep training and then ultimately change your career path?
Yeah. So yeah, I was a teacher for about a decade before I started this business. I was a special education teacher for elementary schools. I have a master's in education and a master's in special education. And I loved teaching. I really loved it. And I was actually on maternity leave with my second baby when I thought, I kind of need a second income. Teachers
Hmm.
here in the US make very little. My husband is a social worker. They also make
Hmm.
very little. So we were kind of living like paycheck to paycheck. And I kind of just wanted a supplemental income. So I thought that this would be a cool way to see clients after school or in the summer or on weekends, and would just be kind of a cool way to make extra money. And I was so fascinated by it because, as I mentioned earlier, our experience with sleep training with my son was really traumatic and really hard. And so when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was doing all this research about like, okay, there's got to be another way. Like, this cannot be all there is. There's got to be a different approach that will work for
Hmm.
us for this next baby. And anyway, so that's how I kind of found this other approach. And I was like, okay, well, this would be really cool for me to learn about for myself and like to use on my own baby so that we can actually sleep this time. But it would also be cool if I could help other moms and like make some extra money. So yeah, so it was 2020. My daughter was born in January of 2020. And I was on maternity leave going through this sleep certification. And then COVID shut down the world. And I just was like, okay, I really don't want to go back to school. I don't want to do this distance learning where we're teaching kids on screens.
Hmm.
I don't want to send my babies to daycare. The daycare that we used was shut down. So I was like, how are we even going to make that work? I'm barely going to make enough money to cover the cost of two in daycare. So it was kind of just like this perfect storm. And I kind of decided, all right, I'm just going to see what happens. I'm going to put like 100% into this Instagram page that I'm starting and to learning everything I can about sleep and helping other parents. And it really just kind of took off.
Hmm.
And the rest is kind of just history. Like, I just never went back to the classroom after that.
Hmm. Do you ever miss it?
I do. I miss certain parts. Like, anybody that works from home or works from themselves for themselves understands that like you do miss speaking with other adults and kind of just like the camaraderie. Like, I do miss getting up, getting dressed, like my little commute to school and hanging out with my teacher friends. Like, I definitely miss stuff like that. And I of course miss my students. I loved my students so much. It was just so fun and hilarious every single day. I was never bored. And I was very good at it. And I took a lot of pride in it. So I do miss parts of it, but I don't think I would go back.
Okay. And how do you manage running this business? I mean, obviously, sleep is a huge part, right? Like, I mean, you're in the
Yeah.
right industry. If you can manage your baby sleeping, you can then therefore get more sleep.
Yeah.
That naturally leads to being more productive. But how do you manage all of that with three kids?
Yeah. I'll never pretend that I have done it all myself. I live in San Francisco where my husband is from. So we have his parents here that help us a lot. They help us with things like school pickups and, they'll take our kids for a few hours here and there. So that is really, really nice. I also have a very supportive husband. For the first probably 3 years of my business, I was working every weekend, and he would take the kids out and keep them busy and spend all of that time with them on the weekends so that I could work. And yeah, so that really helped. And then obviously once my bigger kids started school, a lot more time got freed up, and my husband actually became a stay-at-home dad this year. Which has also been really, really wonderful. So we were kind of debating, like with our younger one, for me to kind of sustain the level of business that I want to do and to grow my business and do all these other things like my podcast and stuff like that I really love doing, I needed help. So I was like, all right, we're either going to have to hire a nanny for her or, figure something out. And he really wanted to be the one that was home with her. So he left his job. And yeah, that's been really, really wonderful. But yeah, the first few years, like, I'm not going to lie, I was hustling and working during naps and after bedtime and, just kind of always going. And then as I started to make a better income, I was also able to outsource a lot. And I hired like a virtual assistant and editor for my podcast and different people to support different things that I didn't have to do absolutely everything because there's no way I could. So,
right. How long did it take you to ramp up towards that?
It's been a pretty steady incline. So I believe I had like 1,000 followers, and that was when I kind of launched my first paid product. And then by that was like in September, and then things grew very fast from there. So I think by that like December or January, I had about 50,000. And at that point, I was kind of matching what my teaching salary was. But this was back in 2020. I feel like there was this huge boom of like parenting pages and influencers and stuff that all just grew super fast during that time because everybody was home with their kids and looking for advice on like how to get through the day. So yeah, so a lot of it was like I just was kind of in the right place at the right time and had like, a different enough of a perspective for people to want to follow and to pay for my guides and workshops and things like that. And then once I kind of hit that point, I also started to be able to make money from brands. So doing like paid partnerships and affiliate marketing and stuff like that.
I mean, you say, it's kind of like right place, right time, but I think there's a lot of motivation, dedication, resilience that goes into it, especially as a mother of 3. So congratulations. It's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I know. I try to not like sell myself short like that because you're right. I mean, it's both. It's part of it was right place, right time, luck. And I also like can't lie. I was really hustling and I was working very hard all the time.
Sounds like it.
For a long time. Yeah. During the week, I was a stay-at-home mom. So I had them home with me all the time. And then once they started preschool, that freed up a lot of my time during the week. But then it was kind of like I always had a baby. So it was like once my oldest started preschool, I had a baby. And then once my middle started preschool, I had a baby. So I haven't really been home without a kid since I became a mom. Which is, So, but they also, I mean, because of this work, like they've also been my greatest inspiration, right? So like, I always had something to talk about or something to share or something to teach about because it was going on with me in my real life in real time. So that's always been kind of cool too.
And I think a big thing with, I don't want to say sleep training because that's kind of not what you do, but in the whole realm of, baby sleeping, how easy or difficult was it for you and your partner to decide on what you were going to do?
He's always kind of just deferred to me and let me decide.
Okay.
I was the one that was mostly getting up and doing the nursing and stuff like that. So he was kind of ready to support whatever I felt like doing. And so the bed sharing thing, I don't think really even took much convincing because he just saw that like it made the most sense. And like I said, we were traveling for a bit during my middle child's infancy, and one of the places we stayed at for like 2 months had a queen size bed, which we were used to a king at home, which had much more space for us and the baby. My husband's like over 6 feet. So we actually slept separately for a couple of months. I would sleep with the baby in the bed and he would go sleep with my son. And that was fine. Like it just, I don't know. We both just have such a flexible attitude about it because we know it's not going to be like this forever. Like it's not, we don't need to fight our kids about sleep. We don't need to make it this like huge emergency. I don't know. We have a very chill attitude about it because to us, it's just like, they're going to sleep when they sleep. And, we're not going to waste our time fighting about it or worrying about it because it unfolds naturally and with time. So, there have definitely been nights where we're like, oh, we wish this kid wasn't in our bed right now. But on the whole, on the whole, we try to just be flexible, and he really just kind of lets me decide what's going to work best for me.
Okay. I mean, that's great. That seems like very healthy way of approaching it. I mean, at the end of the day, especially if you're breastfeeding, like it's, a lot on the mother. And I think I read also, and I did that as well with my husband, we slept in separate rooms because I was like, well, I mean, there's no point in both of us being tired. Like, you might as well sleep in a different room.
Yeah.
Come for a few cuddles, then we'll separate. And then in the morning when I'm awake or baby's awake, you're awake, we'll come back together. And then if I need to nap, you can help. And I actually think that's one of the best things we did, which suffered a lot with the intimacy for sure. But you regain that so quickly later on. Like, again, those first few weeks or months, depending on how long it is for you, can seem like forever. You're just like, am I ever going to get through it? But then what comes at the other end is just so beautiful. And, getting that mindset right of just like, okay, well, you've just had a baby. You've decided to have a baby. It's not going to be your life the way it was before, right?
Right.
So setting those expectations is super important. And I think a very big misconception, correct me if I'm wrong, like with sleep training is, most people think like, oh, my baby is sleep trained. But I think in general, she's just also a good sleeper. That said, it's really difficult to then understand their cues, right? Like, is it teething or is it discomfort or what is it? So I think a lot of people have this belief with sleep training that's like, once you've trained them and they start sleeping through the night, that's going to be it. It's going to be 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours every night.
Yeah.
But that's just not the case. It's like a roller coaster. And I don't know if that's the same with the baby-led sleep that you also offer, but...
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that I dislike about sleep training culture is that it sets parents up to feel like they just have to do this one hard thing, which is the sleep training, right? They just have to get through these few tough nights and then things will just be easy from then on. And I think that's just like such a lie and such a disservice to tell parents that that's how it happens, because I can't even tell you. I mean, even the research shows that like by 2 years old, you can't tell a baby that was sleep trained versus not, because most of the time it's like starting back at square one once they become toddlers. So, and that's why sleep trainers sell toddler courses, because it's like it stops working.
Right.
Most parents, this is from another research study, most parents have to sleep train multiple times in the first year. Like it's not just a one and done. It's like every time baby gets sick or every time you travel, you have to just redo the whole thing. So that's a huge misconception. And I mean, any kid, like they're going to have nightmares. They're going to have fears. They're going to get sick. They're going to get teeth. They're going to go through separation anxiety if they're starting school or if you're going back to work. Like there's so many things that can come up and happen. And I think one thing that sleep training kind of robs from some parents is this, parents get like panicked about it. They're like, well, we sleep trained her, so why is this happening? Like this is, when really it's just, that's just part of being a parent. Like they still need us. Just because it's nighttime doesn't mean that they don't have needs or things that come up. So yeah. So whatever your approach to sleep, I would just be ready for that, for things to come up. And I will say, like, we see clients, we do like one-to-one consultations, and about 80% of the parents that come to us have sleep trained before. So like, what does that tell you? Like, is it really working so well? Or, we have a family right now who just started with us because their 3-year-old, they say, we sleep trained her. We did cry it out as a baby. It worked great. She was a great sleeper. And now it's like hours at bedtime where she's freaking out, crying. She's like, it's almost like she's traumatized. Like she just flips out when it's time to start the bedtime routine. She's getting up. She's, multiple night wakings. Like it's back like she was a newborn, and she's so distressed. And we see it all the time. Like it happens all the time.
There's so much research out there. Like I have to say, even when I tried to, see the benefits and the cons, everything, like my mother-in-law sent us an article, how like it, the attachment issues or whatever that happens with cry it out. And I was just like, okay, I wanted to hear what she had to say. I read it, and it was just written by a man who was like, oh, mothers do this and mothers do that. And, they barely even know how many times they woke up. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to listen to this. Like, what does this guy know? He's not the mother. And then it's just really dependent on what you read and like what, avenue you go down, because then you're just going to find similar things. But there's just so much information out there.
Yeah. Well, and it's confirmation bias. It's like whoever's looking at the research, they're going to see what they want to see, and they're going to look at it through their own lens. Like a doctor will say, oh, it's totally safe and effective. It's like, yeah, because there's no research of babies like dying from sleep training. But, like an infant mental health specialist might be looking for different things, or a lactation consultant might be looking for other things because it can impact supply. And so I think it's just so important. There is a lot of research out there about this, just like anything else. You have to just be careful about like what lens the researchers looked at it through, what lens you're looking at it through, and what matters to you. It's like a risk benefit for every parenting decision, and only the parents can do that and make that choice.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to something you'd said about how, a lot of clients that come to you have actually done sleep training before. Mm-hmm. Is there any research that you have seen that, there is the cycle of like how sleep training affects them then in later toddler years?
I wouldn't say there's any that's like specific to the toddler years. There's a couple of more longitudinal studies, but they stop at age 6. And those studies will usually say that there's like no difference between the sleep trained group and the non-sleep trained group in things like attachment. But there's like a lot of issues with the methodology of some of those studies. Like I mentioned earlier, there is one study that looked at 2-year-olds, and there was basically no difference in the group that was sleep trained versus not in terms of how they're sleeping. So, it basically that just tells us like what you do in infancy doesn't necessarily guarantee a certain outcome, right? So whether you bed share in infancy or whether you sleep train in infancy or whether you do something in between, by age 2, it might be a wash anyway. So you kind of just have to think like, are you doing this because you think that it's going to set yourself up for a lifetime of great sleep from your kid? Or are you in like a crisis situation and you really need to get sleep and you need to just do something that's going to work fast?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, most people really is probably just because they need sleep, right? Or work, and who knows. But for yourself, what has actually been your favorite part of the journey of learning about sleep training and implementing sleep training with your own kids?
Yeah. I would say just learning about, like I said at the beginning, learning about how different cultures do things, I think has just been so eye-opening. I have such a unique perspective on it because so many of my followers are from other countries. And so it's really cool and really just fascinating to hear about how other places think about sleep and think about parenting infants and things like that. And so that's been kind of my favorite part, is like having those conversations with people from other places. It's just so interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And I am so glad that I learned about how to safely bed share, because it's been really just so great for our family. And I do feel like I missed out on a lot of like moments with my oldest that I could have maybe had if I had known about it back then.
Okay. What would that be, for example?
It's just been really sweet. Like my daughter, she's almost 2 and she sleeps in bed with us for most of the night. And she will just say like the funniest, cutest things in the middle of the night. And you'd think it would be annoying because it's like you want to be sleeping in the middle of the night, but it's just so funny. Like she'll say beep, beep. And she like wants me to move over or something. And she's saying beep, beep to get me to move. Or like last night she just like sat up and she was like patty cake. And she wanted me to play patty cake with her. And I'm like, I mean, people listening are probably like, this sounds like a freaking nightmare. But it's just, I don't know. I think it's just because it's my third and I know how fast it goes that I just can't be annoyed at it. It's so cute and sweet to me. But yeah, it wouldn't be for everybody, I guess. But that's the beauty of it. It's like you get to choose what works for you. All I care about is that parents know that they have options and that they're not scared into making any one particular choice because they think that they have to, or that that's the only choice available to them.
Right. I mean, yeah, education is key in understanding the different methods.
Yeah.
Now that you do have your last, is there like a time frame of which you're like, okay, by then I want to not co-sleep anymore or bed share anymore?
Yeah. The bed sharing to me doesn't bother me so much when she's not nursing all night. So that's kind of what we're going through right now. Like we're doing the night weaning right now because I was getting really kind of touched out and fed up with her wanting to be latched to me all night.
Mm-hmm.
And now that she's not, I'm like, oh, I actually kind of love having her in the bed and like snuggling with her. I don't mind it at all. It's actually super sweet when she's able to just like sleep and when she's not trying to harass me for milk all night. So yeah. So for me, it was more of the breastfeeding that was the issue. And the bed sharing, I really don't mind. So I don't have a huge like desire to get her out of the bed. We still do have a routine where we put her to bed in her own room every night so that she's comfortable in there. She's, feels safe in there. It's part of the routine. And it's the similar thing that we did with my middle. And then eventually those stretches just get longer and longer. And then they stop waking up or stop coming to our room eventually.
Right.
My middle daughter, I used to call a barnacle because she was just wanting to be attached to me constantly. And I like never thought it would happen that she would be okay sleeping in a room without me or, that she would ever stop breastfeeding. And she did, and she does. And, now it's like, It seems so far away that was ever an issue because she goes to bed perfectly fine now, never comes to our room, sleeps till 7 a.m, and we have to wake her up most days. So it does happen.
Those sound like glorious days.
It really does happen. I know it's hard, like when you're in the thick of it, and especially if it's your first and you don't have a lot of other experience with talking to other moms or, knowing moms that have older kids, like it seems like it's never going to be you, but I promise it does happen. And that's really like one of the only reasons we had a third. We were like, well, we know we can get through it. Like we've gotten through it twice before.
Right.
And it is so true. So.
I have one more question with the bed sharing. What do you do if you have like a helicopter kid? Like the one that just moves around all the time.
King size bed.
I mean, you're still going to get a few kicks and maybe punches.
And trust me, I do sometimes. I definitely do sometimes. Another thing that lots of parents will do is put a little sleep space next to their bed instead of in their bed. So like whether that's a little like travel cot or like a small little mattress or just something so that their child still feels like they're right there with them. They're next to them, but they're not actually in the bed. That can be like a good kind of in-between solution. If you are getting like kicked in the face constantly.
Okay. So it does happen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Because that's one thing I'd be very, very concerned about. Like literally when I watch her sometimes on the monitor, like I don't even know how, like she travels. I swear she books tickets and she's all of a sudden in a different place. I'm like, I don't know how people bed
happens. Yeah, it definitely happens. But also I think, so some kids move around a lot because they're like cold or like different things. There could be other reasons why a kid is like really flailing all over the place. Sometimes it's actually like an iron deficiency. There's so many reasons why a kid would be super, super restless. And a lot of times if they are bed sharing, they're not as restless because they're just going to like cuddle up and chill. Definitely not all kids, but yeah, some.
I mean, that's really interesting. I'd never thought of all these other different aspects that could be, but that would be for another case, I guess.
Yeah.
For those listeners who would love to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm at Hey Sleepy Baby on Instagram, and my website is also Hey Sleepy Baby. I also post sometimes on TikTok. I'm not good about being super consistent on there, but I try. And my podcast is called No One Told Us, and I have guest experts come on and talk about all kinds of topics from, feeding to just parenting in general to relationships, all kinds of things.
Well, I absolutely love your podcast. I've definitely listened to quite a few. Very happy for what you do for us parents, new parents and older parents alike. And thank you so much for sharing today with me on my podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me.
Might look into your course for the next one.
I'll send it to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Rachael.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you've just watched and enjoyed this video, I'd be so grateful for a like and if you'd hit the subscribe button. With your support, I'll be able to invite bigger guests and provide more value. If you're listening to the audio only, make sure to follow this podcast to get tips on parenting and partnership and hear inspiring stories from other parents as well. See you next week.